they're not going to come back.
Like call the committee of the whole meeting for Monday, March 18th, 2024 to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Gaffino.
Here.
Trustee Christensen.
Here.
Trustee Curtis. Trustee Gately.
Here.
Trustee Lowry.
Here.
Trustee Nedved.
Here.
Trustee Salazar.
Here.
All right. Audience comments. Trustee comments. Discussion item 1, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 tonight is the 2024-25 budget review. The village board will remember that the COW meeting 2 weeks ago, we had the initial overview, which is a general high-level overview of the upcoming fiscal year budget that's being prepared by the staff. This is a little more in depth where we start going into department highlights. And then after Jason is done with this presentation, obviously, if there's any questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them. And then we bring it back again on a COW agenda in April, just to open it up to questions from the board. So at this time, Jason's going to walk us through the upcoming proposed budget.
All right. So we'll just start with a high-level summary of the budget. Total revenues, the first column budgeted at $30.9 million. Total expenditures, $37.4 million for a net decrease of $6.4 million. I will point out the general fund is a balanced budget at a net increase of $50,810. And then a lot of the funds you see we'll get into later, but motor fuel tax, Route 31 TIF, capital projects, and then water, they're showing big decreases. It's not uncommon for a lot of those funds to just accumulate money over time and kind of have a year where we have a lot of projects going on, or some of that money that's built up over time is spent, or we had a lot of carryovers of things that didn't get done this year that were moving into next year. So that's accounting for a lot of those big decreases. The revenues, the village's largest revenue sources are sales tax. This is made up of the general fund 1%, the 3% municipal cannabis tax, and the 0.5% non-home rule. Revenue for sales tax last year, if you see in that first column, we had just over $8.9 million in sales tax alone. We did think that sales tax would come back a little bit, so we budgeted this current year at a little over $8.4 million, and we're kind of looking like we're going to hit right there. Right now, I'm projecting a little over 8,439,000. We are expecting about a similar amount for this next upcoming budget year at 8,406,000. We don't include in here the proposed decrease or removal of the 1% grocery tax. As we go on and we'll just kind of keep monitoring that, that would probably decrease the sales tax revenue $700,000 in the budget. So we'd have to look for other ways to make up that money. Most likely removing capital transfer, looking at our vehicle and equipment transfers we make from the general fund to that fund and reducing those for a year. Possibly looking at moving some utility tax from the capital projects fund over to the general fund. So we have a few different options how we can make up that money if we need to, but going forward, we'll probably have to look at more sustainable ways of doing that.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In the miscellaneous other, it seems like we've been losing on average $1 million a year. What consists of that fund, and why are we losing on it?
So the miscellaneous other, those are just things that kind of come and go, and I don't have a breakdown in front of me of everything that goes in there. But it's not necessarily like losing. It's maybe like we had a big one-time thing that happened one year, but they're not really things that are kind of sustainable every year, or that happen every single year, just kind of one-offs really that make that up. So
funding source.
Where's
the revenue coming from?
Those I don't have in front of me. I'm sorry. Like I don't have a list of everything that goes into that. I can look it up
if there's a way we stop shedding $1 million a year in any fund, we should be looking at it.
Yeah. I'll bring a list back next time of what makes up that miscellaneous. I just don't have every single piece of it that goes into it. The other taxes line is made up of things like income tax, replacement tax, utility tax, amusement, video gaming. Makes up about 18% of our revenues. And then the third largest is the property tax, which we approved this past December. Makes up 14% of revenues. But those three taxes, the sales tax, other taxes, and property taxes, make about 59% of all of our budgeted revenues. Total expenditures, the 37,418. Personnel makes up the largest at that at 11.5 million or 31%. Personnel went up 460,000 or 4.2 from last year. We're going to cover personnel in a little bit here of some of the specifics that go into that. Capital is the second largest portion at 28%, just over 10.5 million. Capital did increase 736,000 from last year. We don't have anything related to the potential public works building in here. Should we move forward with that later, we'll probably bring back a budget amendment that would add that into it. And then the operating / others made up of various professional services, repairs and maintenance, technology services that we use throughout all the operations. The current year is projected, you see it at $6.2 million, even though we had an $8.9 million budget. A lot of that has to do with that public works building. We had the construction services that we thought if the building would move forward this year, which is going to not get spent this year and basically carried over to the next year. The staffing. So we have 2 proposed staffing changes for the current year. You see that total fiscal year, or the FTE count goes up 1.5. That's due to the IT assistant going from part-time to full-time. So that would do is give us additional IT support. But then we have the GIS function, which is currently done by the planner. That would come off of the planner so he could focus just on planning, and then GIS would go to IT. So he'd be kind of half IT support, half GIS. And then the water department is asking for a new lead water operator position, which makes up the other 1 FTE increase. So this position would provide additional oversight to both the field and the treatment plants in the form of increased testing and monitoring, increased site visits to the wells and the treatment plants, and then increased programs such as hydrant maintenance, testing, and valve exercising. So just doing a lot more in the field and getting us up to speed.
Just a reminder, the water employees all get paid out of the water fund. So it's not out of the general fund where the IT person would be. So it's all paid for by water rates and miscellaneous revenues that go into the water fund.
Some of the personnel budget assumptions that go in. So our public works and police sergeants contracts are up at the end of this year. So we don't know what the raises or the increases will be there. Police officers are due a 4.25% increase. And then for the non-union, we have a 3% increase. Medical insurance on the HMO side, 5.7% increase. PPO actually is going to go down 0.8%. On the dental side, we have no change to the HMO plan, and then the PPO increases 7.9%. Our IMRF, so our retirement for the non-public safety, our current rate is 9.63% this year. We are projecting it to go up to 11% for next year. So we're using a blended rate for this budget of 10.2% to cover both years. And then our police pension contributions are $1,852,000, and that comes from the valuation, the police pension valuation we had done by our actuary. Just looking really quick at the IMRF pension funding, that has gone up to over $300,000 over these past couple of years. As you see, our rate has kind of peaked at 12% in 2021. It came down a little bit over these next few years, but we expect it to go back up, and primarily because our IMRF funded, when we go back a couple of years, we were probably about 100% funded there, but then there were some investment losses they experienced. Now we're probably down to about 79% funded. So because we dropped a couple of years ago, we probably expect that to climb up a little bit more. But as I mentioned, we're probably looking at maybe 11% or so. So basically, kind of these last few years, it kind of hovers around that 9 to 12%. On the police pension side, you can see our contributions have gone up significantly over the past 10 years, primarily, which is really a function of how it works as we get closer to the state requiring us to be totally 100% or 90% funded by 2040. So as we get closer to that, we just expect those contributions to go up even higher. You look at back to 2016, I think we were 747,000. Now we're 1,852,000. So we're going up, but our funded percent is 62%. As I mentioned, state requires us to be 90% by 2040, but the village strives to be 100% funded by 2040. On the debt side, we have 2 outstanding debt issuances. One, our 2014 bonds, which was done to build the police department, and then the 2017 bonds for our water capital. As of the end of this fiscal year, $2.9 million on the police department debt and $3.3 million on the water debt. A total between principal and interest this next budget year, $1.1 million. The 2014 bonds for the police department is funded by pledged sales tax. So that's money that comes out of our general fund from our sales tax revenue that gets to pay those debts. And then the water fund is just water user charges go to pay that debt. Now moving on to the general fund. These first 3 columns on here are the last 3-year actual. Then we have the 4th column is the current year projected, and the 5th column is our our 2024-25 budget. You will see on the revenue side, we've experienced some pretty significant revenue increases over these past few years, but we are starting to see it come back a little bit. On the revenue side, we are budgeting fairly conservative this current year, just not knowing what a lot of things going on with, especially with the grocery tax. Our general fund balance projections over these past few years, the village's policy is 40 to 50% of having a fund balance to our budgeted expenditure ratio. As you can see, this current budget, we are projecting it to be 62.2%. And the reason it's kind of going down, as you see from when we're at 71%, is a lot of those surpluses we've had in the general fund over those few years, we pushed it over to the capital projects fund. So we're not keeping a lot of money in our general fund. Should we have kept that money, I think the last 3 years, we've done $8.9 million from the general fund to the capital. We'd probably be well over 100% funded or 100% reserve in our general fund. But this is really just meant to keep that capital balance high while just making sure we're within our policy of 40 to 50%. Major revenues that make up the general fund. So I listed the 6 revenues here that make up the majority of our general fund, 85 to 90% of the revenue that comes into it. We talked about sales tax going down a little bit. Our income tax, we've kind of been in that $2.8 million range. We expect that to be fairly similar this current year, so no real change there. Use tax, again, we're at that $690,000, $700,000 range. We don't expect much change coming into this next budget year. Property tax, we did propose the 2.5% CPI increase with the new construction. So we should see an increase of about $90,000 this current budget year related to property tax. Building permits are kind of hit or miss each year, just depending on what's going on within the village. Historically, we've budgeted about $350,000, which seems to kind of be the normal amount that comes in with just kind of the everyday things going on. But then when you see these past 2 years, we had $690,000. And this year, we're projecting $780,000. That's when we had these big industrial buildings coming on, and we have these significant increases in. But we typically just try to budget very conservatively based on what just the normal things going on in the village are. And then the cable franchise fees continue to just decrease every year, just as people get off of cable and go to more streaming services. You could see last year we're at $255,000. This year we're kind of trending towards $234,000, and we're probably seeing it go down a little bit more next year. Here's just some history on our sales tax, our largest revenue source. You can see in 2021, we really had a significant increase. That's really when the village's 3% cannabis tax came into play on that year. And then coming after that is when kind of COVID and we saw auto sales start going up. So these past few years, we've been some of the highest years we've ever been on the sales tax side. This current year, we are seeing it starting to come back a little bit. Not quite like it was, pre-2021, but definitely still up there, still high, but just starting to come back just a little bit on the sales tax side. Getting into some of the departments. So we have the legislative and board. So that makes up a lot of the things for our boards and commissions. $105,000, $830 budget. Just a couple, I'm going to go through some of the departments and a few just kind of highlights or big things that stick out. So we have lines in there for donation, sponsorship, and community engagement of $12,500. The admin/IT budget, $1.1 million. I mentioned the part-time IT got upgraded from part-time to full-time. And then we have some money in there for contracted document imaging services. So this is getting everything scanned, any documents we have scanned. So they're all in a database, so we can access them electronically. In the finance, HR, $678,000 budget. We broke this out. If you look at previous years, admin, IT, finance, HR was all part of one department. We kind of broke those out just to separate them a little bit going forward. We do have the $40,500 Springbrook, our financial software. That did go up $12,000 this current year. That's mainly just as we moved off of being internally hosted on a server and moved to the cloud. We did see an increase there related to that. The police department, $7.9 million budget. The police department is proposing buying a bloodhound, so having another dog on staff. The cost of that, $10,000, and that can be paid with DUI funds, so accumulated money that we already have set aside related to that. So this is not money kind of new in the budget. It's money that we have there available to spend.
I think at this point, because that's a unique purchase, we thought we would talk about it for a minute or two. But the initial purchase of $10,000, as Jason said, will come out of a fund where you have to use money towards police activities or whatnot. So it's not necessarily a general fund type expenditure. But the annual upkeep, which isn't listed, is about $2,000 to $3,000 a year for this program. Joe, would you like to talk about why you want a hound dog?
Sure. So we always sit down and look at what services we can provide or what we're not providing. And this wasn't even on our radar until after the new year. We have a lot of assisted living centers in town. We had somebody from the memory care unit come up missing, and they felt that he had no clothes on, and it was very severe temperatures. Officers responded, couldn't locate him. They put the drone up, couldn't locate him. They asked for the new bloodhound from Aurora, and the bloodhound hit on the area. He fell into like a little gully kind of by the area where officers would not have located him, and the person would have died. So they brought that to my attention, and I initially said no, because you have Aurora in King County. And of course, they said, sometimes they're not available, or you feel bad asking for other agencies' assistance. So then about 3 weeks later, we had a severe hit and run DUI crash. We didn't know if the driver either was thrown from the vehicle or took off on foot. So officers put the drone up, went around the bike path trying to locate the person, found somebody walking down the road along Route 25. The bloodhound who showed up from Aurora actually took the scent from the airbag deployment, went down the bike path, went to where the person was standing by the squad car, goes, "Yep, that's you." So we're able to get charges on the person for that, and we determined that nobody was thrown from the vehicle. So because of that incident, like Steve says, the DUI fund, so the officers have done a really good job in DUI enforcement. Some fines are allocated for the general fund. Other fines are allocated for the DUI in either enforcement or education. So if I can show a nexus to a tool or equipment or a bloodhound with that incident, we can use those funds for the bloodhound. So not only that, we also assist other communities with our search and rescue team, Major Crimes Task Force. This would close the gap. So when the Aurora bloodhound's not available, the King County one isn't available, we might be available. So simply because that saved that one life. And a few years back, I don't know if you recall, we did have somebody leave the memory care facility, and they found him frozen to death in a gazebo. Not saying that a bloodhound would have helped, but you never know. So that's when I came to Steve and said, this is something we might want to look into. It's a small cost, because we've done a good job changing the ways we get rid of squad cars. Instead of sending them to auction, we repurpose. We already have a squad car available, so we can just use the funds for the cage and the temperature gauge and the training and the bloodhound. It'll probably come to $15,000, and we have about $60,000 in the DUI fund. So we thought it'd be a good use for it.
Originally, I think we both said no. And
Yeah.
then we talked it over, and when you have money in that fund for these types of activities, and it's only $2,000 to $3,000 a year, we thought with 2 places in town with memory care units, and actually more than 2, it's at least 3 or 4.
And we've been getting an increase in kids running away with the mental health crisis and running away from the schools.
How many calls do you guys get about memory care people just wandering off? Because it just seems like this is something that shouldn't be happening, because they should have security features. And if somebody's prone to wandering, I mean, are they aware of things like Apple AirTags and other ways like that, where we shouldn't be expending so many resources? Because
No, I agree with you, but
shouldn't be getting out of these places.
Unfortunately, it does happen. We find a lot of people leaving the one on Airport Road, walking down Airport Road. And we also have a Silver Trail. We're seeing a lot more people with dementia leaving the area. So it's not even the assisted living centers. It's just as we get older, there's more people that are still wanting to live on their own, that are leaving the house, and then the adult children show up saying, "I can't find mom or dad," and we're kind of scrambling trying to find somebody. But I agree with you.
I think we could do like maybe some type of a public, make people aware of the tools that are available for people that are elderly that want to live at home, whether it's an Apple AirTag or Find My iPhone or something like that.
Sure, and we honestly, Trustee Kurz, we do a really good job, and mostly because of Robin with senior services and the triad. We've hosted a couple seminars. We have, whenever an officer goes to a call where they think senior services is needed or a social worker, we do work with the family and try and give them the support they need. But it's still, and I honestly, Robin, you can stand up and attest to it. Rarely do we have a second occurrence. once the kids are involved, and we work with the police and the senior services. So they do take the help we offer. It's just
For such a small amount of money, it's like no brainer.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great
It's a big
use of
asset.
something bad, DUI, and turn it
Those
around.
funds are
That's decent.
earmarked. They have to be used for something,
Correct.
right, related to police
And
services. And I think
until-
that's
And
That's a
until we
fine
had
use.
that hit and run crash, I didn't even think that was possible. But now I could show a nexus because we had an incident with that. We could use those.
Well, I'm sure you use it a lot more than you think,
Yeah. And it's great for community engagement. We
It
see
is,
the hit Zelda is getting back into the schools. The kids love Zelda. Now they're going to love a bloodhound.
And do you have an officer who's willing to take the dog, or you don't know yet?
Oh, for sure. I
Okay.
think there'll be a line and we'll have to do interviews.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Prospective
Would this be
parent.
able to help with searching for drugs and things like that as well then too?
No,
No.
it's not cross-trained. We
Gotcha.
looked into that as well. And then we also figured out we'll have to buy a vest for the dog because when a bloodhound finds an offender, they want to play with them. So it won't be able to protect itself.
Believe it or not, there's actually dogs that our water superintendent brought to our attention. There's dogs that are trained to sniff for water leaks too, the chlorine in the ground. And
So is that next year?
we're very fortunate that our water system is pretty Loctite. We don't have a lot of water loss.
All right.
We train one to like search for gold or
There
something
you
like
go.
useful.
Right. So additionally, in the police department, we have the City of Aurora dispatching services budgeted at $250,000. Community development, $962,000 total budget. The one thing we have in there to point out is the City View online portal. So this is $30,000 to where people can, if we get it up and running, where people can apply for permits online and do more things online rather than come to Village Hall to fill out manual paperwork. Public Works Department, $3 million total budget. When there we have $150,000 for contracted snow plowing, and then $150,000 for various parkway tree trimming, removal, and replacement. The non-departmental budget.
I just got a question on
Yeah.
that or comment. So how do we do this year on snow plowing then? Where we have a surplus of cash on that or?
Yeah, we didn't quite hit the $150,000 we budgeted for that one.
Yeah.
I think we only have one snow.
I think that's a number we've used for the past
Yeah.
because some years it comes a lot
Over or
higher and some
something,
years it
yeah.
comes
Yeah.
a lot lower. So I think that's kind of an average number. I think we kind of selected over the years.
Then how about the parkway trees and a certain amount every year roughly?
Yeah,
Are
we normally
like 100?
replace 100 a
Yeah.
year. That has ranged anywhere between like 30 and 40,000. This year we looked into stepping up our tree trimming program. A lot of the trees are getting bigger faster.
Yeah.
And then we're also doing it in conjunction with our road programs. So, we're going to try to get ahead because some areas this year don't have parkway trees. So we're going to try to get ahead of where we're going to
Sure.
be in the years to follow.
Do you
So-
still think we need 100? I mean, is that kind of the,
Yeah,
as
it
far as
seems
replacement?
it seems like we can find a spot after our tree inventory. They also pointed out spots where we need trees or we
Yeah.
could use trees.
right?
So we normally average. I mean, I think after maybe a couple more years, after we get all the ash trees down, that number still might come down every
Yeah.
year. It could go down to 75 or 50.
Sure.
But it just seems like a number that we can actually achieve is the 100.
The truth be told, that number is probably, and I think it went up about 20 grand from last year. Parkway trees in general, it's hard to keep up with them. So when we kind of went to that three-prong approach that Brian was talking about, every year when we do the road program, we try to hit that neighborhood because we figure by the time the road program is there, their trees need to be trimmed up for the equipment and whatnot at that point anyways. Then you have the one-offs, the people who call in and say, my tree's low or it's blocking a stop sign. So we go out there and we'll treat those on a regular basis just as they come. And then there's money in there for, Brian and his team to, if they see a neighborhood or something that's getting out of whack and the road program's not going to hit that neighborhood for a while, they can send some resources to that area and trim them up. But it's getting harder. As Brian said, the older our town gets, all the new subdivisions over the last 15, 20 years, all the trees are maturing now. So it's more expensive and taking longer to actually trim them.
So this is contract tree trimming, you're thinking? Or
Yes.
that line?
Yeah. I mean, we do.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, the start of the fall, we had about 84 trees that were called in by residents alone. So the guys have been working on that late, over the winter. So, I mean, I think we're down to anywhere between 20 and 30 trees on that list. But, it just seems when the weather gets nicer, people start walking around and they make notes of the trees, and so that's we do a lot of that in-house. Now that our staff is bigger, we'll be able to do some more tree trimming in-house. So that'll help too. But it's just like we're trying to, if we get out to Tanner, Tanner's so big that it'll eat up quite a bit. Just last year we did the 600 trees in Chesterfield, and that was about 74,000 for 600 trees.
So just a quick reminder, the tree service, it's one account that has multiple line items underneath it. So for instance, in this breakdown, you have contracted parkway tree trimming, contracted parkway tree removal, parkway tree replacement, and then disposal of the leaves during the leaf program. That's all rolled into that account. But as Brian said, and I remember looking at some of the metrics that you sent out, I think in a few months span, about a year or two ago, you took down 400 trees in-house. So we try to do trees internally when we can, a lot of times in the winter time, if things are slower, not a lot of snow. But that number, what it is it gives us flexibility. So if he does less in-house or he does less with a contractor for actually removing a tree, then that money just can be used towards trimming more trees. So it's kind of, we have that resource so we can shift those funds to any tree related item.
Well, it's good you're trimming them because people like that.
It's probably one of the number one complaints we get in Public Works.
Yes.
The non-departmental budget of just over 500,000. This is made up primarily of our sales tax rebates. Currently, remember, we have three current agreements: one Gerald Ford, Gerald Genesis, and then the inline town center building. We do have a $50,000 increase. That's basically due to Genesis. This current budget year is when they open, so we kind of have about a half a year, 3/4 of a year this year. Next year, we're doing a full year. And then we have $45,000 for various special events. Transfers of $1 million. So this is made up of $400,000 to our capital projects fund. In prior years, we've always budgeted about $600,000. This year, we had to drop it down to $400,000. And then we have our transfer to the police department debt, which is basically our pledged sales tax money going to pay for that. Just moving on to the capital projects fund. You'll see the past few years, the last 3 years, that blue bar, the revenues, those are all the money that came in from our general fund. Those last 3 years, $8.9 million went over. Then you see this year, obviously we have a lot of capital plan, which we'll get into in a second. That red bar, that $5.7 million expenditures in total. Some of the major programs we have here are the 2024 road program at $2.3 million. We have Orchard Gateway resurfacing, $780,000. This is part of it's here and part of it's in our motor fuel tax fund. So it's kind of split between both of them.
And a major portion of that is paid for by a grant.
Yeah. So this is just our portion that we're responsible for. The Public Works Facility, Engineering, Design, Construction Management, $1.3 million. A lot of this, as I mentioned earlier, was carried over from this current budget year, which just didn't get spent. We're assuming next year we're going to spend that. We got boiler replacements at Village Hall and the Police Department for $60,000 and $120,000. The Village Hall lift replacement, $100,000. River Park electrical improvements, $100,000, and a new village message board for $75,000.
So just a quick overview of that new message board, that is similar to the one we have at 3156. The idea was to put one out around Randall and Oak Street in that neighborhood, as it's kind of in the center point geographically of our community. The other thing too about the Public Works Facility, Engineering, Design, out of that 1.3 million, most of that is for construction management. That's the assumption that we put the budget number there as if the Public Works building was going forward, which as of right now, we're not 100% sure until we talk to the board about that. But as of right now, we still put the money in there in case it does.
Moving on to our water fund. As you see on the far right, our water fund is projected this year to use over $3 million of our reserve balance. Primarily, a lot of it's due to capital. We'll get into it to a second. The water, we did asking for a lead water operator position. The debt, $380,000 of principal, $114,000 of interest. We are still going forward with our water system master plan. That's currently in progress now, but a lot of it will be carried over. Half of it will be carried over into this current budget year as they finish it. And we have over $3 million of planned capital. We have our SCADA upgrades, which is a carryover from this current year of $600,000. While 6 improvements are ongoing and then carried over as that gets finished. We have various improvements to both our east and west treatment plants, west being $191,000, east being $106,000. Finishing up the Clearwater, Lovedale, Offutt, and Fox River lining project for $500,000. We have water main replacements at Aspen Court for $150,000, and a Route 31 in Marvo valve replacement for $250,000. And then we're assuming the start of our central water tower reconstruction of $1 million. It's going to be a much larger project than $1 million, but we're assuming in this current year, if it gets approved, we're probably going to start construction. So we'll incur some expenses this next budget year, but probably the majority of it the following year. And then we're installing water tower mixers on both the east and west towers for $100,000. The one thing we don't show here, I just want to mention, is the water rates. We are projecting that the water rates will go up 12.5%. If you remember this time last year, we presented basically a 50% rate increase that was phased over 5 years, it being 15%, 12.5%, 10, 7.5, and 5, or just to get us there. So this current budget is put together assuming that June 1st rates will go up 12.5%. The vehicle and equipment fund, this kind of fluctuates each year just based on vehicle life, how the condition are doing. A lot of the vehicles we don't really have a lot this current year. All we have is we did order those 4 police Durango squads, where we expect to get them this year, but then we're carrying money over for the following year, $80,000 to actually outfit the squads. And then we did order this 5-yard plow truck for $350,000. So it's on order. It's in this current year budget, but we're probably not going to receive it till next year. So we're just carrying that money over again. So it's money that wasn't spent from this year being moved to the next. On the equipment side, Public Works is requesting a wood chipper, $82,000. We're going to have police department AV system upgrades in the community room, $60,000. The police department's requesting a virtual reality training system for $69,000. And we have some various riverfront park audio and camera system upgrades for $45,000. And just quickly, some of the other funds, motor fuel tax, the revenue there, we're projecting $809,000. Operating budgets made up of salt, $300,000, alley and street repairs for $90,000, and then streetlight maintenance of $78,000. I did mention that Orchard Gateway resurfacing. We have another $1 million here related to that project from the village side. Route 31 TIF, we have various money in there for $100,000 just to go out there and start promoting that TIF grants and TIF reimbursements as that TIF I think it's got another year and a half left on it. We do have $700,000 transfer from Route 31 over to United. And if you look down at United, we have the $700,000 of property purchases planned. So just if anything comes up, we have money available to go ahead and acquire properties for redevelopment. We are expecting a significant increase in the property tax revenue of just over $1 million. But we see that third line, the IED corporate park developer note, $371,000. That's related to that money that we rebate back to that one parcel that Building B gets. I think it's 75% of the money that they pay into the TIF. So we are budgeting to give back a significant portion of that revenue to them, but a lot left for the TIF to actually spend. And then the Route 31 and airport intersection and traffic signals of $575,000. $500,000 of that is going to be paid for by a DCO grant. So the village portion is only about $75,000 of out of pocket for the TIF. The insurance fund just has our liability insurance coverage of $388,250. The tourism fund is where we have our hotel tax budget at $111,000. 90% of that gets remitted back to the Tourism Council. So we have a budget of $99,900. North Aurora Days, we have revenue of $42,000, expenditure of $66,000. That does include fireworks for this following year, with basically the remainder of that, the difference between the revenue and expenditures there is kind of made up with that leftover 10% on the hotel tax plus whatever reserve balance we have in the tourism fund. On the SSAs, we have Oak Hill mowing and maintenance of $14,960. That's for taking over a lot of that common area maintenance from the homeowners association. What we don't have shown here for Oak Hills, I think we just today found out that we have $20,000 for the pond basically study
Yeah, if the board remembers, there's 2 aspects with Oak Hills HOA dissolving. One was that the SSA was increased to handle the general maintenance of the normal things that the HOA would have handled. And then, of course, we had money that we're collecting every year in the SSA for a future pond project. But before you can actually figure out how much that pond project or restoration is going to cost, we had to have an engineering firm come out there and actually assess it in its current state and give some options for us to go out and solicit some proposals from companies. And Brandon got it today, I think this morning, but it's about $20,000, 19,000 and some change to have a company go out there and assess the pond in its current state and put up basically a plan.
And I think we were going to look into that to see if we can maybe cut that down a little bit. If there's not, we don't need every aspect of what's in that contract. So we're going to review that first too.
Yeah, so that's an item we'll bring when we bring the budget back next time. That'll be added into there. We have money in there for Willow Lakes as we're doing fence repairs for just as the fence. We assess various pieces of the fence. We have $25,000 in case we need to replace any. And then the town center, we have the wetland and basin maintenance of $25,000. Sanitary sewer fund, we have various repairs / improvements for any sewers that need it for $150,000. And then we have cleaning and televising for $60,000. Police department debt service fund, that's just the principal and interest on the bonds, $550,000 for principal, $88,200 for interest. And the police pension trust fund is just our normal service, disability, and surviving spouse pensions of $1.8 million. So going forward, next two committee of the whole meetings in April, we'll bring back any changes to the budget or any updates we have. So if we find out that the grocery tax is for sure going to go away, we'll present changes to the budget based on that, or like the Oak Hill plan. We'll have our official public hearing on April 15th, and we'll bring back the budget ordinance on May 6th to approve. Going back to that question about the miscellaneous revenue, how that was going down, Steve just reminded me, a lot of that has to do with grant revenue. So if you remember, we had those Recovery Act funds of, I think, $2.3 million that we were using on water improvements. So a lot of that was spent last year, and most of it actually this year. So there's really not much left of that grant fund. So that's why it would look like that money's going down, is because we had a big $2.3 million grant that we spent over the last couple of years. And then now our grant revenue is kind of going down a little bit because of that. So it's things like that make up that account, is where we might have a grant, we might not have a grant. It just kind of goes year to year on some of those miscellaneous items. If there's any specific questions now anybody has.
If the referendum passes tomorrow, when does that take effect?
So if the referendum passes tomorrow, then I'm guessing probably one of those April meetings we'll bring back a ordinance to actually increase the tax on our side. We'll send that down to Department of Revenue, and then July 1st is when July 1st is when our tax rate would take effect, and then we would see the first revenue coming in October, I believe. Then
it coincides with the start of the fiscal year for the state. As far as that goes, to the train of thought. It'll come back to me. There was something else I wanted to tell you about revenues.
I was just wondering, there had been some discussion of someone taking over the present location of where Verilife when they move over to the new location. Is there any update on that, and would there be any perhaps increased sales tax revenue from there?
Yeah, I can answer that. Nathan Scott had planned for this current upcoming Plan Commission meeting.
For Plan Commission has a public hearing.
But it's astute to look at our budget, and if you look at that drop in the general fund transfer that we've been doing to the capital fund, a lot of that was because when dispensaries and whatnot were first opening, the revenues were higher, and we've seen a dip in that revenue. So with this opening, Jason put together a very conservative budget, so it doesn't really account for any new revenues yet because it hasn't been approved. And that's what I was going to bring up, the grocery tax. The grocery tax hasn't been approved yet. It still has to go through some legislative work before it could get approved in the budget. So the question for us is, it's very possible that we could approve this budget and not knowing if it's going to be in place or not by that timeline. So the nice thing is, I mean, we do have that $400,000 transfer, which just essentially goes away. That's money that we plan to put in the capital. We don't have to. But as Jason and I said, we've met internally, and we said for 1 year, we can always come back and tell the board, this is how we're going to reduce spending this year, see how it all plays out, and go from there.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks.
Yeah, and on that cannabis tax, I can't publicly say what the revenue numbers are, but it seems like every month it kind of just keeps going down and down a little bit more, like as we go, as more other places nearby open up and other communities. It just seems like when you look at revenue when it kind of first opened versus where it is now, it's a fraction of kind of what it was. I mean, it's still significant money, but it's nowhere near where it was. It just seems like every month it's kind of a little bit less, a little bit less, a little bit less.
You know, this morning we talked in our staff meeting about some of the encouraging signs we're seeing, and we are seeing just in the town center alone, there were a lot of things that were on hold because of the ownership and whatnot, trying to figure out who owns what properties and trying to get leases approved. And we still have a couple businesses like Slick City and Kids Empire, and then we had the Union Hall that's looking to build. You have the apartment complex that's interested. The Ram dealership's opening. You're actually starting to see some movement now after years of not seeing much. So, you know, we're looking forward to some of that. Plus, we do believe that a fitness center is looking to reopen in the town center. So that's another positive. So we're starting to see businesses. Mike's getting more phone calls lately, which is great.
That's where the UFC was.
That's what we believe. We believe it'll be in the UFC spot.
Excellent.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
I think it's good.
Okay. Motion adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Have a good night.
Great.